and welcome to our Dimensions of Everything with our van build tour. Our names are Mike and Heather, and we've been traveling in our 2013 Ford Transit Connect for about 2 years now, and questions that we get quite frequently are different dimensions about our van. So today we're going to go through literally everything in our van. We have multiple tape measures ready to go to give you the dimensions of everything. I think I said that enough, but basically you're going to get the dimensions of everything. So grab a pen and paper, you're going to want to write all this down. We'll first start with the dimensions of us so you can see how we fit relatively inside of our van.
I am 6'5".
And I am 5'6". All right, now that we got the first two dimensions out of the way, let's start with the outside of the van. Basically, we're gonna be rattling off a bunch of numbers, starting with the length of our van, about 15 feet.
15 feet is an important number because a lot of roads will have limits on the length of your vehicle when you're driving through national parks or some twisty-turny roads through the mountains. We've never had a problem, and 15 feet keeps us well below the 22 to 23 foot limit that a lot of those roads have. So next we'll check the height of the van. So the van is about 75 inches tall, which would be around 6'3", and with the roof rack, it comes in just under 7 feet.
I would like to have a caveat that these are going to be rough numbers because we're not actually making sure everything's square, but roughly our van is about 6 feet tall, plus the roof rack. A little bit more detail on the roof rack itself. It is about 6 inches tall and 9 feet long.
Moving into the cab, there's really not much that we've changed in this space except adding the overhead shelf. So we figured we would measure the original overhead shelving space and then the addition that we put on. The depth on the overhead shelf from the front of the plastic to the area where we installed the new one is about 10.5 or 11 inches. So that's the space that you would have when you first buy the van without adding in any additional shelving. We did recently release a video on the construction of the overhead shelf, and that has the measurements for the board that we used, as well as some of the other features in the van, like the posts that we anchored it with. So we'll refer to that video in the description, and that'll have a little bit more detailed information. But the depth of the overhead shelf as it is now is 27 inches. So from the front of this rail all the way in is 27. The roof does slope, so the height at the opening that you can store in is a little less than 9 inches, and it narrows from there. So still a lot of space, and the total width is going to be a little bit tricky to measure, so let me use the tape. 47.5, 48 inches. So that would be the total width from one side of the van to the other. And the distance between the two posts, which is kind of the usable space to fit things through, is 23 inches. So from this post to that one is 23, and that's about the biggest width item that you would be able to put in unless you maneuver it around. And while we're measuring sort of the bigger spaces in the van, we'll do the floor to ceiling height that we have, about 51 inches. So that is the space that we have after installing the floor and the ceiling in the van.
The original height of the van was a little bit taller. We've added about 1 inch of insulation foam in our floors, plus the 3/4 inch board, and then we dropped the ceiling a couple inches as well to be able to put some insulation in there, and then each of these boards is about 1/2 inch as well. So you definitely have a little bit more room and can be a little bit more conscious when you're doing your build. But as far as the build that we did, our space is about 51 inches, but you can definitely probably squeeze a little bit more in if you absolutely need to.
We did have to make sure that the height of the bench, which we'll get to, was still comfortable enough that we can sit. As you can see, my head kind of brushes the ceiling here, but I am able to sit comfortably for the most part in the back area with both the height for my legs and from the top of the bench to the ceiling.
The van kind of slopes out. The widest point is roughly, I don't know why I don't know how to use this very well. The widest point of our van is about 55 inches in width, but it does narrow up here at the top a little bit more. And again, these are just rough, so that way you kind of can get a better idea of what you're working with. And then the top portion, because it does narrow a little bit more at the top, is roughly about 48 inches. And the livable floor space of our van is about 72 inches or 6 feet.
When we were doing the build of the van, we figured that our usable floor space was about 6 feet by 4 feet. When you're doing your construction, that should be the space between the wheel wells and from the front end to the back of the van.
Our bed's a little bit more tricky to explain the measurements. We do have a full video of explaining how we built our bed and all the exact measurements, which again, we'll link down below, but a quick rundown. Our original bed is the same length of the floor, so 6 feet long, but we added an extension that adds about 10 inches.
Yes.
Well, we gotta measure it anyways. Our extension lives back here. That gives us a little bit more space on the bed, because basically what happens is we push up the chair and insert this extension to make our bed more than 6 feet long. It is 6 feet and 11 inches long.
Nice.
To be specific. The first component that we're going to measure is the slab part. So the part that I'm sitting on is stationary. It doesn't move aside from the lid that pops up because all of our electrical is in this area here. From the end of the sliding bench to the part that connects to the stationary bench, it's about 56.5 inches and roughly about 22.5 inches wide. The width of the bed when it's all the way pulled out is roughly 36 inches, and the height of the total bed is about 12 inches. Now that means when we push the bench back in, we get roughly 18.5 inch of aisle space from the bed to the cabinet and about 35 inches of aisle space from the bed to the door. So this is the section of the bed that doesn't move. It is a little bit smaller than when this bed is fully extended because we needed to be conscious of Mike's height and the ability of this chair to go all the way back still. So it is about as close as you could possibly get it to this chair in order for it to be able to move all the way back. And because of that, it's a little bit shorter. Now we sleep with our head at that end, so it doesn't really bother us that the bed is slightly shorter, narrower on this side. Although we did sleep with our heads on here for the longest time and it didn't bother us either. Mostly the length is of concern. That being said, the width of this bench is about 31.5 inches.
Which is only about 5 inches shorter than the maximum width of the sliding bed.
And roughly 14 inches wide. And 13.5 inches tall. If we were to rebuild this, we would have made sure that this height matched the sliding bed slab height. The reason why this one is slightly higher is because we built it originally, but then we went and bought the solar batteries and realized that it needed to be slightly taller. So we had to modify it, and you can see where we had to add on little slabs to make the lid part of this taller to be able to fit in the batteries.
The frame is the same height of the bench and the bed, but the pieces on top that cover the opening had to have an additional 1-inch board placed to ensure that the batteries and electrical equipment have space to sit in there.
Attached to this bench are the flip-up brackets that extension sits on, so you get that extra 11 inches of space in this section here. Because this cushion sits on the slightly taller bench, it's slightly thinner than the cushions that sit on this side of the bed. The cushions we bought, it was a twin extra long that we kind of Frankenstein to be able to fit and make into our cushions. We used an electric carving knife to slice these into the correct shapes that we needed, and then just went to Walmart and bought fabric and hand sewed these painstakingly so. They were memory foam, so we just peeled off the 1 inch of memory foam on this one to make it slightly thinner than the 6 inches of memory foam that it was, if that makes sense.
So these are 6 inches and that one is 5 inches in height.
Yes, to be able to adjust for the 1 inch of extra that we had to bring this bench up. And then the thickness of our bed extension, so I can feel where the board ends. So it looks like we used 1/2 inch board and 2 inches of foam. So total, this bed extension height is about 2.5 inches.
So we mounted the flip up brackets so that all of that would be roughly level when you sleep on it.
Even though all of our cushions are different heights, when it's all put out, it all is flat based on the different dimensions of the cushions itself.
So in retrospect, we probably would have made the sliding bed portion 1 inch taller to match the electrical bench that's stationary.
Yes, and then our cushion sizes wouldn't be so wonky, but it works. So that's part of the fun about van life and building out your own van, is rigging up everything to be exactly what you need it. And nobody can tell unless you do one of these videos of all your mistakes.
So last but not least is our cabinet. The frame we bought as a whole from Lowe's, but for the most part, this should be close. We added really thin boards on the side to make it a little bit more level. It's a little over 36 inches, so probably 36.25 inches wide. That's the floor space that it actually takes up. And the depth of it is different on either end because of the way the van is. It's not set flush against the wall. We actually built around it, but the depth at the back with the molding is about 14.5 inches. And on the other end, it's 15.5 inches. So this isn't a perfectly square cabinet as it's mounted. We had to make some adjustments to frame it in as close to correctly as we could. We added some 1 inch by 1 inch boards to the top of the original cabinet so that we could add a sliding drawer. So with the 1 inch by 1 inch cabinet and the tabletop surface we added in, the total height for the cabinet is 32.5 inches. And with the tabletop surface, that is about 41.5 inches wide. The desk slides out from the tabletop to give you an additional about 10.25 inches of workspace. And depending on where you're at against the wall, the narrowest part of the tabletop is about 11.5 inches, and it widens out all the way to about here at 14.5 inches. This is all flat across. It's the edge that's against the wall that has the different dimensions. One of the other things we did was add a flip-up sink surface. So it's nice because it gives us a place to do dishes, but it also adds additional counter space, which is really nice. So this adds from the front of the board to the end about 14 inches, but an additional 13 worth of usable space because there's about 1 inch of overlap. And width, it gives you an extra 15.5. So it's the same distance as the back of the tabletop to the front with just that inch of overlap, but it gives a lot more usable surface area, which is super helpful. These doors are super helpful for us. We've been able to use them in different ways. This side is a bit decorative, but this has a shoe rack that we mounted on for additional vertical storage. The dimensions for the doors, they're not squared off shape, so at the top, they narrow a little bit down and are about 22 inches wide, and at the bottom, they are closer to 25. And the usable space, which is marked by the fabric here, is just about 52.5 inches in height. Something that we've seen a lot on these vans is flip-up tables here on the back doors. These ones are made using a 3/4 inch plywood board, and the boards were cut to be 12 by 16 with 3/4 inch. And this side was a little bit bigger, 20 inches by 12 inches. So the same width on them, just different lengths. Again, these are fairly standard and have been super useful. We hope that this has been enlightening. It is something that we have been asked a lot about, and we thought it would be a great idea to share these all in one space. So if you did have any questions, hopefully they have been answered. If not, please feel free to drop a question in the comments if there's anything that we missed that you would like to know more about in terms of the dimensions or space within the van.
And again, we'll leave the links below to where we went in a little bit more depth about the specific dimensions of our bed and the overhead shelf, as well as a link to the video with all of the different things that we usually have in our van. So if you're curious about the dimensions of the refrigerator or the giant pillow that we usually stuff things in that sits in that corner perfectly, it'll all be there as well. Thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.
I'm living my best life. I wake up with the sunrise. It does not look a thing like I thought that it would, but I've been getting my steps in, and I sleep with my best friend. It's the best that it has been in a long time. I'm living my best life.